I just want to get on record, and again, you don't have to answer anything, but I think,
I just want to get on record, but you don't have to
well,
answer
you don't. If you're
anything.
like, well, I'm not going to answer that. It's fine. I just want to look. I want to get on record what the heck happened in 2023. I just, you know,
Well, let's see. 2023, I had cancer cut out of my left leg.
right?
Okay. Other than that, it's been a pretty good year.
Really? Well, I saw a little bit of controversy, and I'm going to give you my take on it.
Okay.
At least my optics, and then I kind of want to know like what really happened because everyone's got a view of something, and it seemed to me that for the last couple of years, well, if anyone's really watching you, and if anybody really wants to sort of do the deep dive of Gary DeMar, you've been talking about this stuff for as long as I've known you,
Right.
and you've been asking questions, and because you're the end times guy or one of them, probably last man standing of a generation, and I mean that respectfully, as far as who's been handling and working with these texts for the last 30 years.
Well, Ken Gentry.
Well, but
and
respectfully, I
I,
don't think Ken deals with the public though.
he, true.
Okay,
true.
so you
like I do.
yeah, you actually go places, and I see people run up and hit you with verse after verse after verse after verse. What about this, Gary? What about this, Gary?
Right.
What about this, Gary? I remember meeting, you know, him at one of the conferences, Ken, and he didn't even really know what an iPhone was. Like I was like, I mean, so his distance at that, even from culture. He's just an interesting guy. He's just, he was like, what's this iPhone thing? What's it doing, and I remember joking to him like, so you can tell me who the beast is, but you don't know what an iPhone is. I mean, it just was funny, people line up and they throw verses at you. What about, and so I've seen you interact in such a way that I don't think most people have had to. So you've really been this guy. So you've always talked about this stuff, and you're the de facto, like, you have to answer every hard question.
Well, I'm open.
Yeah.
That's my deal.
And you've always been open.
Yeah, yes.
Right.
And
So not that you're a liberal, but but you've always been open to say, well, I know someone says this and that. And so you've been doing this forever, at least as long as I've known you. Then last year, it seemed like that something was building. It seemed like on the peripheral, people were trying to get you. Like it seemed like what everyone started, there was these, what's Gary really believe? And then you end up on a podcast, My Optics. You end up on a podcast, and at the end of the podcast, you're wrapping up, everyone's laughing, and then someone says, Gary, so when you die, what happens to your body? And you said something to the extent, actually, I'm still good here. You said something to the extent of, well, I think I get some kind of new body and go to heaven.
Well, what I was getting at, I said, there are those who say, when you die, you get a new body. At the point of death, you don't wait to get your body. And I said, that's a position that I don't have a problem with. I think it's a pretty reasonable biblical position. And the thing that I don't want to say it upset me, but I'm thinking, wait a minute, the result's the same. The person dies, they get a new body. And it's whatever God decides, whatever body God decides he's going to give you, I think you're going to be okay with it. But because that's not a confessional answer, that put me out of sorts with a lot of people within my own Reformed camp. But I've never been, for example, I got a email from a young guy at church. Gary, I want to put are you interested in me putting your name in to be an elder at the church? And I said, well, I appreciate, you thinking I'd be a good elder. And I said, I don't think it would work because I'm too outspoken and I have some confessional issues. And I've always had confessional issues. And while I'm a seminary graduate, a lot of people think I'm ordained. I am not ordained. I've never been an elder, never been a deacon, and I've never pastored in the church. I've taught some Sunday school classes and so forth. So I feel like I'm free to ask questions and put people on the spot, and you shouldn't have to come back and say, but that's against, say, the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed or with confessional standards. The confession says self, same body, and I'm thinking, where is that language, self, same body? And I often kind of approach my wife with these types of things, and she said, well, Gary, where is that phrase, self, same body? Well, it's not anywhere. So it's an interpretation of various passages, and I have questions about that.
Like,
I don't
like the Trinity.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Trinity.
It's not in the Bible.
It's not. No, it isn't. But I remember dealing with cults, especially the Jehovah's Witnesses, of how to deal with a Jehovah's Witness and the triune nature of God. And it's pretty simple. Bible says there's one God. It says Father is God. You got in the Book of Acts. You lie to the Holy Spirit. You're lying to God.
Right.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God,
Right.
and the Word was God. Okay, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Right.
I mean,
I just have to show that they all have the same attributes.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, and
God attributes.
but I never would have answered a Jehovah's Witness who would come to my house based upon a creedal formulation. And the creeds, when you read the creedal formulation, it is an explication of their exegetical work, and they came to those conclusions. It doesn't make the case within the creed based upon the text that I just cited. And so I would never go to a Jehovah's Witness and say, well, the church has always believed this. This was worked out that Chalcedon, et cetera. I never would have done that. The arguments I've always made with the Jehovah's Witness was, let's look at the text. When you go to Colossians chapter 1, Jesus is said to be the creator of all things, but the Jehovah's Witnesses put in brackets created all other things,
Right.
because they believe that he was a created being.
Right.
To me, show me the text, and don't show me, don't take me to a confessional statement. If you do take me to a confessional statement, I'm going to look at the confessional statement and look to see what texts they used in order to make their case.
Right.
I don't understand what's wrong with any of that.
Well, the comment you made at the end of that podcast, which was interesting because it was almost just in good fun. It was almost as if the music was playing, they're about to sign off. It's like, all right, Gary, what happens to your body when you die? And you just said, I don't know, I think I get a new body, some kind of new body, and I go to heaven. I think that was the statement,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. People lost their minds
Oh,
on
I know.
that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay. You're smart enough to know why people would lose their minds, I think. So tell me why you think people lost their minds on that statement.
I think with anything like this, people say, well, if the confession and the creeds are possibly wrong on that issue, what else are they?
Well, hold on. What
else
did you
they
say
wrong?
that was wrong in regards to creeds or confessions?
Well, actually, the Nicene Creed says the resurrection of the dead.
Right. No, I mean, I don't know of a confession or a creed that would deal with the kind of body, the actual detailed. I'm missing
they don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then what? So what were they drawing from to say, hold on, Gary, you can't say that.
Because of the confessional self-same body.
Self-same body.
Plus the theologians who've written on these passages, commentators, Reformed commentators. It's pretty clear that, except for there's some people who take a different position on this, that they're saying when you die, your spirit essence goes to heaven,
Okay.
but then when Jesus returns physically, sometime at the end of history, raises our bodies, reconstitutes them in some way, and unites that new body with your spirit that's been in heaven all that time.
And do you say I don't think that's the case?
Let's just say God can do that. I don't think the text of Scripture actually specifically says that's what takes place.
Okay.
But I'm not that smart. These people are a lot smarter than I am.
Right.
And so I guess they're seeing things that I can't see because I don't have the intelligence to understand those things.
Well, but are you being a bit coy there?
I like Clint Eastwood. A man has to know his limitations. I know my limitations, and I will concede. If you can convince me biblically, exegetically, otherwise, okay. But I haven't seen the exegetical work enough to confirm to me what the language of the confession is. I believe the Nicene Creed. I believe in the resurrection of the dead.
Right.
I believe that.
But do you believe in the resurrection of the dead in the sense more of the already? There's the already, not yet, but the already, meaning that when I came to Christ, I believed that I was resurrected. It's what I was told. I was told that I was baptized into the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, that I was made a new creature. My charismatic friend said I could live in resurrection power.
Yeah.
Right? And that this body, even physical in a sense, and because people were telling me, well, you can't be a Gnostic.
Right.
So the body soul thing, like, be very careful. Don't do all these. Okay, all right, okay, I'm not going to be a Gnostic, right? But somehow when I became a Christian, this thing that is me, now when I die, because I'm a new creation. I don't know if I missed something. I mean this, like maybe they meant, no, your soul is a new creation, and maybe your physical body is not a new creation, but I still live in a physical body that is doing things differently through sanctification.
Right.
25 years. So I'm wondering, is when you say resurrection, meaning that you believe in the resurrection, that I have been resurrected, you have been resurrected, and now when we die, this new creation gets an e-ticket right to heaven to be in the presence of Jesus?
Well, my guess is most people would say, well, what you just described is the resurrection in terms of what the creed says. That's not what the creed is saying about this new.
Okay.
You've been resurrected in that sense.
Okay.
We've been raised up with Christ. We sit with Him in the heavenly places. That the creedal formulation isn't dealing with that.
It's not. You don't think so? Okay. It means the final.
Yes.
A final resurrection of everybody at the end of history.
Apostles' Creed says, I believe in the resurrection of the body. Nicene Creed says, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. So the question is, in terms of the Bible, what did Paul mean when he said he was on trial for the resurrection of the dead? That's a fundamental question that I think, and been going to a new Christian, going to seminary and so forth, I think there are certain assumptions about that, but I don't know if I ever heard anyone actually articulate to me what was Paul's point.
Okay,
that dead bodies were going to come up out of the ground, that God was going to reconstitute these dead bodies. Is that what he was talking about?
How about I say yes? What he was talking about, he was on trial for this belief system. And that this belief system was that there was going to be a resurrection of dead people. And if I take what I believe is the classic formulation of the resurrection of that dead, what would be so offensive in that is he was saying, everyone's going to be raised up. Your physical bodies are going to be raised up. And when they are raised up, you are going to be judged. And they did not like that message because that meant judgment from God.
Yeah, well, of course, what is it? Hebrews 9:28 is appointed for man to die once, and after that, judgment.
Right. So isn't that the resurrection of the dead?
Well, the thing is, it's appointed for man to die once, and after that, judgment. When does the judgment take place?
Okay, got it.
So
how about at the resurrection?
Okay, so now we're asking the question: if a person dies, Christian dies, what happens? Where are they? Where are they now?
Okay,
we talked a little
Christian
earlier.
Goes to heaven.
What goes to heaven?
Their soul.
Their soul goes to heaven. Are they judged then?
Well, I was told
they're not going to get into heaven unless they're judged in some way or another. You're not
I
going
was
to say
told I was already judged, meaning that I came to Christ, right? In a sense, I judged myself. The Holy Spirit came into me. I said, I'm a sinner. I need to get right with God, and I asked for forgiveness. I said, Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to do all this stuff. And so at that moment, I was told that I was judged
judged in terms of the redemptive work of Jesus.
Of Jesus Christ, and that
He
now
stands in your place.
I would never be judged again. And living in that resurrection power, that resurrection life, was that I will never be judged again, and that I am in relationship with the Father that I was separated from.
Yeah. But you can say all that.
Okay.
But Hebrews 9:28 says that appointed for man to die once, and after that, judgment. Which means, okay, again, these are some things we just don't know. But according to the sequence of that, this judgment comes after death. So the person who is disembodied at death, because that's the position, you don't have a body at death. So when you go to when you go and you stand before God, you're judged at that point. Now do we have to wait at the end of history for a new body and you're judged again? What? I don't. Look, all I'm saying is these are questions that people ask.
Well, I'm seeing the dilemma as I work through it. I would say, well, judgment doesn't always mean condemnation.
True,
right?
Right.
So I'm a Christian. I did everything I said I've done. I die. And the only way I'm even able to now access heaven in the presence of Jesus is because I'm judged.
Right.
So it's the judgment of, well done, good and faithful servant, based on Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
Right? That I'm able. So there is a judgment that allows me to get in. Am I stretching?
No. I think you're right. It's the judgment. Somebody who works for me, I look at a project. I give you this project, and I take it and I look at it. I judge it. I've judged this particular. You did a good job. That's a judgment.
Yeah. Right.
Someone else, I judge. You missed out on something. So there's a positive side of judgment and a good side of judgment. I mean, but whatever it is, this judgment has to take place at the time of death, unless you're a Seventh-day Adventist and you believe in soul sleep, and there's, your spirit, you're sleeping,
right?
Which is a position that's been held. I know Calvin disassembled that view. So if you're going to take kind of a historical view on that, but according to where we are in terms of theological script here, you are disembodied when you go to heaven when you die. And everybody talks about Gnosticism and said, wait a minute, so for all this time, for thousands of years, or whatever the case might be, there's no physicality to you until you get your new body, you're out of the grave or however it was, and you're reconstituted at the end of history.
Right.
But then people say, well, there's this great white throne judgment at the end of history too. All I'm saying about this is, I just think this needs to be assessed. And if the assessment of all of this comes down to what traditionally has been said, I'm fine with that. But there's just a lot of questions that people are asking.
Right.
But
why did they come after you because of that comment?
I think, well,
why was that enough for them to create a website, to create a document, and to get all your friends
and send a letter,
and to say, Gary, we need you to answer some things. We're a little concerned. Now, I thought it was kind of funny, respectfully. I know it probably didn't feel funny, that to me, and it's my world, I get to have my optics in this area. You are the OG. You are the GOAT. You are Uncle Gary. The fact that people thought they could put pressure on you when Southern Poverty Law Center was putting you on a list before anyone else got on a list, right? Before anyone got canceled.
And I'm proud of that.
And you were proud of it. You've known controversy. You've known people attacking you. You've known, and so to me, I was like, if I'm watching the movie, I go, oh, what did they say when they dropped when Pearl Harbor? He says, well, I think we've awoken a sleeping giant.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, look, guys, you see what age Gary is at. Forget what he looks like. You think at this point in his life, Because if you know your history, it's always as men get a little older in the ministry that all of a sudden they're like, Sproul, it turns out I'm a partial preterist, You get, John Piper, you know what? I like Doug Wilson. Like as they get older, it's like it's like you really want to go after Gary right now because you're what, 140? What are you now? I forget what your age. I was like, do they really want did they not see what MacArthur did during COVID? Even MacArthur was like, let's go.
Yeah.
So I thought, what? Did they?
Because I have a platform that people paid attention to.
And so do you think your friends were genuinely concerned, like, Gary might be becoming a heretic, and so we need to really find out because we're concerned for Gary's soul here?
Oh, they might say that. I just think that since people would listen to me, that I would infect them like a virus, and so they would lose.
But what would you be infecting people with? Canon pulls stuff down, Cross Politic pulls stuff down. Friends of ours, people, and so what do you think they were afraid that you were going to infect people with?
Well, let's ask David Shannon.
No, he doesn't count because he wasn't a part of it. He wasn't a part of it, so that's why.
Well, because I think it's people. They got public pressure from their supporters. So you have Canon Press that had subscribers. You had Cross Politic had subscribers and Apologia. I'm not sure. I really didn't have. I wasn't on their platform per se. Right. Although Jeff Durbin, I would be like, Luke. I'd get something on like Saturday night. Jeff's going through Matthew 24, and he needs some information on verse 27. Right. Okay, what can you do?
You're the guy.
This is like 10 o'clock at night.
You're the guy, yeah.
And he, I said, here's some stuff, and so forth and so on. So, I was kind of the go-to guy.
Yeah.
Ken, I don't think you could go to Ken and ask him that. He might have answered that, but they knew if they came to me, they would get something. And if I couldn't supply the answer, I knew other people who could, or I would say something like, hey, here's a couple of ways of looking at this, you could look at this way or that way. I was open.
Right.
And I think, and I'm maybe some of them thought I was going to lose my everlasting soul over this, but I wasn't taking such a stand on this that.
I've known you over 15 years. You've never called yourself a full preterist.
No, right. I haven't.
Right.
Because I think there are more elements to the whole preterist theme here that are important. This is why I brought this is a little off field here.
Go.
This is why I brought Kim Burgess into this.
Right.
Who I've known since seminary days.
Right.
And
you thought you would inject a beautiful mind character into this whole thing.
Right. I would bring a guy in who's been working on this for 40-some years.
Right.
And who's within the Reformed camp.
Right.
And if you ever had conversations with Kim, he was always like, I'm dealing with something here that is very scary. And I'm treading softly here because I know the consequences of this if people embrace it. But if you spend time with Kim, as I did in those 24, 25 podcasts we did, his side of this has always been the applicational side redemptively.
Right.
Okay, what does all of this mean?
Right.
And so a full preterist,
he wants to live in the already fully alreadied. Right? He's focusing on the already not yet. He's saying, yeah, but the already is a reality in and of itself that is fully here.
Yes. And the second volume of The Hope of Israel and the Nations is I'm working through for the last couple of chapters, and as I've gone through this again, I'm saying this thing just makes perfect sense. And by the way, the interpretation of most of these passages that what Kim is talking about, people would nod their head and say, yeah, Yeah, I get that. I get that. I get that. I get that.
But aren't you okay with that as long as you say, and there's still going to be another form of this at the end of time?
Yeah, if you don't say that, then you're in the,
Right.
in the heresy business.
Right.
And Kim and I both, we both agree that there are just lots of things that Scripture just doesn't lay out for us.
Right.
And I think we're a bit presumptive to say this is how it's all going to work out at the end, and I'm I don't want to use, I'm not humble, but giving my inability to formulate all these things intellectually and so forth is to say I just think there's some things we haven't been told.
Right.
And we're making up stuff. We're making up stuff in order to fill in the gaps, and I don't know if there's enough information in order to do that. And that doesn't lay aside you come to Christ, to live as Christ, to die as gain. I mean, all those sorts of things, the spiritual body, all that sort of thing.
You're Trinitarian. I mean,
right. And I just say, look, let's look at this. There's one area.
Hell, questionable for you?
Oh, I haven't. That was like the third question that letter writers do. Some of this stuff, I just be honest, I haven't really thought. I haven't thought about or cared about because I got into this whole eschatology stuff, as you know. Because of a series of books I wrote in the 1980s called God and Government.
Right.
I said, people would say, "Why are you bothering with this?" Because we live in the end times.
Right.
So I had to develop an eschatological apologetic in order to deal with that.
Right.
So I dealt with all this stuff. I never meant to get into eschatology just because of eschatology. I had to get into it because it was on an apologetic nature. And as I got into it more and more and more, I got to solve this problem. I'm a problem solver. And my two sons are problem solvers. It's kind of innate with us. We see a problem, we like to fix it. You solved the thing. I wanted water.
Yes.
I wanted water on this
Right.
acreage, and how do I do this thing? And
Yeah.
you,
you're out there
I had to dig a 200 foot.
You do the
ditch.
work. You start digging into things.
Right.
You start reading. You start researching. I mean, it's a lost art.
That's what I
think
do.
I agree. It's a lost art, right?
Yeah.
The ability to kind of really dig in. I see your library back here. You will spend time going through things, looking at things, and
There's
not a lot of people left who will show their work.
Yeah, this all came that part of me when I was a teenager. I got interested in athletics. I got interested in a particular track and field event. I picked up a magazine, June of 1964. I saw this thing on the shot put. I saw Dallas Long in there. He had held this high school record. He was a world record holder at the 16-pound shot, won the Olympics and all that kind of thing. And this is something I wanted to do. I had played football. The problem with football, my father was, Gary, you're the next, big guy. Okay,
Right.
But I played on a team, guys who couldn't block. And
Turns
all
out it
that.
takes a
And
team.
I don't care how good of a
Turns out it takes a team.
Yeah, it takes a team. And so I focused all my attention on this one event, get me into college and so forth. And I did very, very well. But I learned researched magazines. This is way before the internet, and that's what I did. That's what I do. So when I see a problem, I want to go in there and find everything I can about that problem. And when questions arise, I'm not in the position. I'm just going to go along with what these guys have to say.
Right.
Because there were too many inconsistencies. And I wrote a 200-page response to the 3 questions letter.
Well, it's 5 now, I think. But
What's that?
when I looked at the updated, there's 5 things.
Oh, there are. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm only going on the 3.
Yeah.
And
I'll update you.
yeah, you can. Yeah. And what I did is I took all of these guys who signed that letter, and I looked at all the passages that are the controversial passages.
Right.
And I wanted to see what they said about them.
Right.
And there's no unanimity among them. And so you got Doug Wilson who signed it. And Doug, look, I have to say, Doug was very gracious to me in all this, and we communicated back and forth. He offered some suggestions and so forth, which is unlike some of these other guys. And so Doug Wilson, let's say on 2 Peter chapter 3, took a position completely different from Ken Gentry on 2 Peter 3. And then you got Milton Terry on Acts chapter 1, verse 11. But Ken Gentry loves Milton Terry, and actually I think he and Jay Rogers republished, I think
they have his book on the
a
site.
book on I think it was on Revelation out of his, I don't know if it was his biblical hermeneutics book. And so I kind of had a chart showing, well, Phil Kaiser believes this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, but they disagree with this with Ken on it.
Good people that people say these are non-heretics. These are church-abiding, confessional,
Right.
creedalists. You can take every single verse for the final judgment, and you can find someone, with the exception of Revelation 20, I believe, you can find someone who says, no, that's AD 70, that's the destruction of the temple. Meaning that all throughout our last 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 years, 900 years, you can find people that take key verses that somebody would say, this is the end of time judgment. You can find a reputable person that says, no, this is AD 70.
Yeah.
With the exception of Revelation 20, I think.
Well, let's take Revelation 20. I mean, how many different views are there in Revelation 20 that we're all okay with? We're all okay to say you can believe pretty much almost anything about Revelation 20 and not be called a heretic. And yet you can go to a dispensationalist and say, well, Jesus is going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. There's going to be circumcision again and animal sacrifices again. And that's okay. You can be a dispensationalist and believe that about Revelation 20, the reinstitution of blood sacrifices and circumcision, and you're
in
not
the camp.
And be in the camp. Yeah.
And 1 Corinthians 15, a dispensationalist would say what?
I'm not sure what. My guess is I think a dispensationalist would pretty much go along with confessional stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's it. As long as you hold that ticket.
Meaning, as long as somewhere you put that there's a final judgment.
Right.
After AD 70. As long as you can show a verse.
Yeah.
That I can cancel all these other verses out, but even if like I could say, I think every verse that they're talking about was fulfilled in AD 70. However, I could say in the book of Acts where it talks about when Paul is telling the Gentiles that they're going to be judged, that there's a day of reckoning coming to the Gentiles, I think that's at the end of history. That would get me in.
Yeah.
Because I've got a verse.
Acts 17:31, I think that's what it is.
That says, because I think that's hard for me to put at AD 70.
Yeah.
So for me,
but there are those who put it
right, of course,
in AD 70.
Right, but I'm just saying from an Orthodox standpoint, I'm still in. Yeah. No one can kick me out because I'm saying end of history. I think this verse.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked the other day about Revelation chapter 1, verse 7. Every eye will see him.
Right.
And Ken Gentry in his commentary on Revelation, 2-volume commentary on Revelation, which I recommend people getting because it's got a lot of really good stuff in it. He spends 20-some pages defending that's AD 70. Every eye will see him. That particular part of it is more physical presence of Jesus than Acts chapter 1, verse 11.
Yes.
And yet he spends 20-some pages defending his view, and he's got, well, this person says this about its future, but I got this person over here says, no, that relates to AD 70.
And this is interesting because me, as a partial preterist, or in the preterist camp, I still read Revelation chapter 1 and I go, man, I got to make all this symbolic. But man, it seems the only thing that makes me read Revelation chapter 1 and kind of go, well, I think it already happened, is because it says it's soon.
Right.
So the word soon is what makes me have to go
Soon and near.
soon and
Both
near. So I'm like, but man, that is tough.
Yeah.
When I get more into apocalyptic language, that's easy. Sun, moon, and stars, I can walk somebody through that.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's easy. Sun, moon, and stars, oh, there's a thing going on here. But every eye will see, that's not the kind of apocalyptic language that's apocalyptic.
Yeah.
It's not blood and stars falling that's like, this is like every eye is going to see. That seems pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Every eye is going to see,
There
right?
you go.
So even I have a hard time looking at my brothers and going,
But Ken Gentry says no. That's
Right.
AD 70
Right.
or related to it.
right. And then I go, well, I want to be a good boy. I want to follow along the rules of hermeneutics and exegesis and all this stuff. And I'm looking at people I really respect, and they're telling me that there's timestamp markers, and how do I understand them? Now I get to the end of Revelation and I see soon again, and I'm told, by the way, it doesn't mean what it meant in Revelation chapter 1. Just move on. Don't ask any questions. But because I love these brothers that have been teaching me, I say, well, I'm going to be a good boy. And at that point, it's kind of like I'm a Catholic. I'm going to go with the authority of the people around me, because that's ultimately what I'm doing, because I'm saying, you taught me that 1 + 1 is 2 in Revelation chapter 1. But I get to the end of Revelation and it uses the same word and phrase that I've been beating up my dispensationalist brothers with. How can you not say it's soon? How can you say it's not near? It says soon, it says near. And then at some point someone said to me, well, it says that at the end of Revelation too. So are you telling me everything? It says everything in this book. It doesn't say carve out chapter 20.
Yeah.
And so I have to acknowledge that I'm cheating. I'm cheating on the hermeneutic and the exegesis that I've been taught.
I know, because you got Revelation 20.
Right. And I want to be in good standings and good fellowship with people, and I don't want to be kicked out of my church. And so I say, okay, well, you guys must know more than me. I'm cool with that.
Well, I'd like to say, there are people who know much more they're smarter than I am, know more than I do. So
Right.
I'm not coming down dogmatically and saying this is absolutely the way it is. I said, I've got some questions in here that you guys
Right.
need to answer well enough. So people who are asking me these questions, and I'm throwing them back at you, you just can't all of a sudden go, this is what the church has always believed all these years, because what you find is, especially in terms of eschatology, people have believed all kinds of things throughout the years. And the thing is, you also find people making, predictions about Jesus is returning, and all the signs for every generation takes those same signs
Right.
out of the book of Revelation to do that, to make that case.
Yeah, but they were wrong in the right category.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
Right?
There's a big category of passages that you can be wrong in. Here it is. You can be wrong in here, all these different places.
Right.
And here are these things you can't be wrong. And I think that's the creedal stuff. But I want you to think about the creed. All the creeds are doing is, I believe in God the Father Almighty. There's a verse for that. Maker of heaven and earth. There's a verse for that. Born of the Virgin Mary. There's a verse for that. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. There's a verse for that. There's no interpretation of any of that. It's just there's a verse for that.
Right. I know where it is. As a matter of fact, and there's not even 9 versions of it. There's like 1 or 2, but they're all referring to the same thing. Yeah.
Then you get to, and Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. There's a verse for that. Oh, what verse is it? Which verse are you saying applies to that particular part of the creed? And this is where the hemming and the hawing takes place, because if you say, well, Matthew 16, 27 to 28, well, partial preterists say, no, that refers to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. But it says there, Jesus is going to, judge the living and the dead. Before some of you who are standing here will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in His kingdom.
Right.
What do you do with that? And if you were to take, and let's say you were to take the Nicene Creed, because you're saying with the Nicene Creed, this is what the early church believed. So isn't that what it says? So take the Nicene Creed and put it before AD 70, and it says that Jesus will come again to judge the living and the dead. What would they have applied that to? According to the Apostle Paul and other places in Scripture,
Right.
Well, Jesus did say he was going to come again before their generation passed away.
Right.
Oh, no. That one doesn't count. Although the book of Hebrews says he will come a second time. Well, okay, what was the first time? Incarnation. So what was the second time? AD 70. No, that one doesn't count. The second time is what we call the second coming.
Okay.
It's
So the book of Hebrews, which is everyone agrees is dealing with Jewish Christians, don't go back to the temple.
yeah, right.
Book
Yeah.
of Hebrews is written to Hebrews.
Right. And
don't go back
yeah.
to this temple. You go back to this temple, you're going to die. By the way, here's why you don't need this temple, because what's fading away, what's passing away, right? That is the context of the whole book.
Yeah, okay, but think of this. You get to 2 Peter 3, and there were those who were saying, oh, where's this promise of his coming? Where is this promise of his coming? And there's some speculation, or probably very good speculation, that there were Christians who were saying, Jesus predicted that this temple was going to be destroyed before this generation passed away. And man, this temple looks better than it ever lived. It looked.
Right.
I mean, this Herodian temple.
Right.
Jesus says, hey, they say, hey, we've been, this 46 some years has been work on. Then there's almost another 40 years after this, and the temple is getting better and better and better and better. And so the skeptics come along, probably the Judaizers and people who had abandoned the Christian faith because they said, well, this Jesus was a false prophet and it all sounded good. We want to go back to the old ways,
Right.
the regular covenant. And so there was an apostasy that took place.
I mean, I've been alive 52 years now, and I've seen people in the 30 years of being a Christian, I've seen people in the last 5-6 years all of a sudden just abandon the hope of being a Christian.
Yeah.
So I've seen people just in my lifetime looking at the culture, seeing things being under particular pressures, or if they haven't abandoned the faith completely, they're fully woke and they've got all the flags on their social media page. And you see, and they were strong 15, 20 years ago. They were like,
Yeah.
let's go march at a Planned Parenthood. And now you see them. So I can only imagine this has always been happening.
Yeah, it has been, but we have to understand the New Testament on at least 3 occasions: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, probably Luke 17, Luke 19. You got 5 places, big chunks of the Bible where Jesus is making these very specific predictions that were going to take place within that generation. I mean, that was a big deal. I mean, you get to the book of Acts, and you've got people selling some of their land,
Right.
their property.
Right.
I mean, what Jew in the
It's going to give up
in the
their
history is going to
land.
give
The
up their
land-
land, since that was such a
The land was the
big deal.
covenant. It was the promise. It was.
It was because Jesus had made this statement about all this, and so you're getting almost 40 years. People are starting to waver in all of this, and then all of a sudden 80, 70, and wham!
Right.
So then you look back over all those passages and you say, everything Jesus said and what the Apostle Paul said in the book of Revelation, soon, near, quickly, all that, well, it makes sense.
Right.
But we have forgotten all this. And I want you right now to talk about your Taylor Swift
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Because-
we were in San Luis Obispo, driving through, and went to this boutique store and
How do we go from eschatology to Taylor
hit
Swift?
Taylor Swift. Well, it's when you think about this stuff, it's interesting because people talk about, well, what's this theology stuff good for in the real world, right? Well, it helps you understand actually the real world, right? And we were in this boutique and clothing store. My daughter Emmy kind of pointed down and she kind of laughed, and I didn't laugh, and I said, I don't get it. She goes, Dad. I look at it and there's just a little white T-shirt. Forget the quote, something like "Who's afraid of little old me" or little old right? She goes, "That's a Taylor Swift thing." I go, "Enlighten me." She goes, "Well, that's like It's a line from one of her songs, and that's kind of become the mantra for the Swifties. I thought, oh, okay. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, Nero, I think is 666 is Revelation. But someone's got to tell you, like, well, no, 666 means Nero because there's a numerical value. Some people would have known this, and so there's this little code going on here. Some people would have known it, some people wouldn't have. And as I've always heard that with Revelation, with the exception of Jim Jordan, who can make it all about something else. But I still think he would layer this joke maybe onto it of what God is doing. But what hit me is like, I live in the reign of Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
The reign.
Right.
She's at her peak. I mean, maybe it's going to get higher, but she is as big as you can be. I even work within the entertainment industry.
Right.
Like, I'm not under a rock.
Yeah.
Let alone this rock in this area. I had no idea. I had no idea the vernacular, the joke. It was so prevalent that someone decided to print up T-shirts for a trademark they don't own and sell it at a boutique shop for like $80. So not only this wasn't like a throwaway thing. This was like someone's going to spend $80 to $120 for a white shirt with that Taylor Swift moniker on it, and I didn't get it. And it just made me think. I had to have my 17-year-old daughter explain it to me. And as I looked at Revelation and went, like, that was written at that time to those 7 churches, I can't fathom the things we don't know. As much as we've studied it and the history we have, there's got to be so many inside lines and jokes. You could take any rap song, and try to decipher it. The references, the cultural connections, what things mean, what they don't mean. You have to be up to date.
Oh yeah.
To understand a rap song. More rap, because rap's doing a very particular thing other than maybe a straightforward rock song. But a rap song is using so many layers of imagery and code, and they're taking samples of songs, and that sample might mean something. There's a song on the new by Metro on the new Spider-Man soundtrack, and there's a opening hook sample, and my son just found the sample from a 1950s kids album, and it's sped up on the sample in the song today, but he found it, listened to it, and then what they were actually saying, but you can't really tell when it's sped up, matches what the movie, that part of the movie that it's in. What the kids are singing matches that part. So that sample is taken from a 1950 song, made into a song in 2023, sped up so you can't even hear it, but it's all there and it all connects.
Yeah.
So
here we are 2,000 years later.
Right.
2,000 years later. Oh, and we know exactly what Revelation is about in terms of today.
Right.
Things happening today.
Right.
I think of Sweet Home Alabama, the Swampers. I was talking to a young girl who loved music and so forth, and I said, "You've heard of Sweet Home Alabama, Muscle Shoals." Muscle Shoals was the music capital for some of the best groups, and the band that played behind them were called the Swampers.
Okay.
The Rolling Stones went there. All the big group, Florence, Alabama, for all this sort of thing. Neil Young's mentioned in the song. What was that all about? And so, in order to understand the song "Sweet Home Alabama," you got to know all that history that most people don't know. Right. So you go and look back in the book of Revelation, and you read it, and you say, John says, read and understand this, that they were supposed to read and understand it. And I think they were in a better position to read and understand it than we are today, which means in order for us to understand the book of Revelation, we've got to go back and look at what was going on at that particular period of time. And I think that's Jim Jordan, basically using the Bible alone, pulls this imagery.
Not using Josephus, not using Tacitus. He actually does the work from the Bible.
Right. And it's harder for us because we've got to go. We don't know that stuff, but they knew it. But if you pay attention to the time indicators, these shortly take place, time is near, Revelation 1:1, 1:3, Revelation 22:10, time is near. You are now forced to deal with all of that within that time frame, and that now helps you to be a better interpreter of the Bible.
Right.
Even though you might not be able to figure it out, I don't have to figure all the little details out, but the Bible confines me to those time indicators, and I'm stuck with those time indicators, and I'm stuck with the Bible in order to interpret it, because the book of Revelation is almost like 400 allusions to the Old Testament.
Right.
So this brings us to what's going on in this particular debate. I think we're in the same position.
You responded to people. You wrote 20 pages.
Well,
I mean, for the sake of the history marker, what do you think they did with that letter to you, or to the letter that they're having people sign? I just want to get on record historically. What do you think they did to you?
Did to me in what way are you?
Well, they did something.
Yeah.
What did they do? In your opinion, what did they do?
Well, let's just say what they wanted me to do was to affirm what these three questions stated, and once I affirmed those three questions, everything would have been okay.
What were the three questions in your memory?
Well, one had to do with this. I think the physical second coming, the resurrection of physical bodies at the end of history, and then the third one had to do with I think it had something to do with the earth would one day be judged physically, and evil would be done away with, and all that.
Okay.
Which on the third one, I said, I've never written about any of that.
Right.
And then the first two were the ones that they wanted me to affirm, and what I wanted is give me the scriptures so that I can evaluate whether or not the question you're asking me lines up with the scripture passages.
Why was that important to you to have the verse? Why?
Because I thought that's what it's all about. It's just show me that verse.
Right. But I mean,
or verses.
Right.
It's like,
so were they
sign this contract? Sign this contract. Well, can I read it first? I want to know what's in this contract. I want to know what I'm affirming. I mean, you want me just to affirm what that says, but I've got some questions about those things.
Yeah, just affirm the concept, Gary, that Jesus is going to return.
Well, that was what Doug Wilson, he said, Gary, because I laid out, I said, Doug, look, there's disagreement among all you guys. He said, well, yeah, but you could affirm this, but still acknowledge.
But just join the disagreement club, Gary, and tell us that you've got a verse somewhere that you believe in the second coming.
And then my critics would say he's only affirming those things just to get out of this dilemma that he's in.
But why is he in a dilemma? He's got to have one verse that he believes says that Jesus is going to return at the end of time.
Well, I want to know what I go to somebody and say, you want me to affirm that, give me your go-to verse that I can look at it and see whether that applies. And if someone gave me a go-to verse, I would say, okay, but this guy says that does not apply to that.
Are you comfortable saying you don't have a verse for that Jesus is going to return at the end of time? That you haven't found one yet?
I would say that in every verse I've looked at, I could see how people could say that's the end of time verse. And I could say also that I could see how this applies to events leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
Okay.
And let me alone to believe that. Let me stay with that position, and let other people stay with that position too. I don't see. And if you really push me on these, I'm going to push you. Dirty Dozen, Posey. Samson Posey, that was his first name, Samson Posey. He didn't like Clint Walker. He didn't like to be pushed. Don't push me to force me to do something that I don't have a clear understanding of as to what you are saying, why I must believe this particular thing. Look, I know all the arguments. But all these guys who signed that letter, there's disagreement among them on which passages apply to what. So,
but not Revelation 20 and not 1 Corinthians 15.
Revelation 20.
Hold on.
Oh,
But they all agree on Revelation 20, and they all agree on.
What do you mean? They all believe it? They all.
I think everyone that signed that believes that Revelation 20 has not happened yet, and that's the end of time, physical return of Jesus, and resurrection.
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay, I think they all believe
I know
1 Corinthians 15. I think they all believe 1 Corinthians
yes,
15.
Right.
They all have agreement on 1 Corinthians 15.
Right. Yeah. So my question would let's look at Revelation 20. And my memory isn't the best on this, but it's my understanding that even Ken Gentry is very uncomfortable with Revelation 20. He sees it as enigmatic in many cases, and I forget the language he uses. I could probably find it if I went through one of his books here. It's like, I don't know, this one kind of messes with my hermeneutic here, because Revelation 21 and 22,
they say it's fulfilled.
Some of it's fulfilled, and so how do you?
I think Lightheart takes 21 and 22 is totally fulfilled. I think so.
It's possible.
Yeah.
So what do you do with Revelation 20? The only problem in Revelation 20 is the 1,000 years. To me, that's the only problem.
Okay.
Satan is bound during the ministry of Jesus. He's let loose near the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. He's slapped down and done away with, and so forth. That fits. What doesn't fit is the 1,000 years.
Okay.
So the premillennialist says, well, that's got to be a literal 1,000 years. That hasn't happened yet. The amillennialist and the postmillennialist will say, this is a very, very long period of time. Well, but that's chapter 20. Now what do you do with 21 and 22? It's a dilemma for partial preterists who.
And postmillennialists still say, because the charge of the postmillennialist is optimistic advancement of the kingdom.
Right.
Right. They're not talking about the millennium.
Right.
When someone says I'm post-mill.
But Revelation 20 doesn't say anything about that.
Right. But what I'm saying is it's optimistic. Jesus is reigning.
Yeah.
Victory. I could go to your library, see victory after victory, post-millennial. But what they don't seem to tell you is, however, at the very end of history, Satan's going to be let out. This whole thing's going to hell.
Yeah.
But Jesus will come down in a final war. And now everything that you kind of read from Tim LaHaye and Jenkins happens then.
Yeah.
So we can make fun of them.
Yeah.
For everything they think is going to happen before. All that actually does happen.
Yeah.
But at the end of time, short period, Jesus destroys them, and we're still going to win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not very optimistic towards that short season at the end. So that's even interesting to me.
I'm thinking, wait, what's going on here? What is that all about?
Right.
But
that's really okay. Revelation. Okay, maybe they might have some. Maybe Gentry's waving. We don't know. I mean, I've seen Gentry change. I mean, he's flipped on a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he seems to be allowed to.
And
I don't know what card. I don't know what hall pass Ken Gentry got at some point. That he's off limits. He gets to change things. Doesn't have to respond to critics. I don't get it. That's confusing. I love this game of theology. It's a game to me. And I want to talk about this stuff the way people talk about sports. And so I want to be Stephen A. Smith talking about LeBron and talking about basketball players and who should be performing and who isn't, and that Kyrie Irving is not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He was the hope and the promise. He's finally showing up and all that. Look, Ken Gentry in this game has not showed up. He sits in an ivory tower.
On the bench.
He sits in an ivory tower. He sits in the skybox. He sits in the skybox and just sends manuscripts down, and everyone buys it and puts it on their bookshelf. They go, "Oh, I got the new postmillennial book here by Ken Gentry. Look, I have the post." And it's like, have you read it? Have you seen the changes? He doesn't have to answer to anybody. And it's funny, you make a comment, And they all come after Gary. Sign this, sign that, do that. And I'm thinking like, what game are we playing here? Something's rigged here? I don't mind saying that, which is why I want to let this genie out. I want to see us dealing with philosophy and theology and eschatology and typology in a way where we can't let people off the hook anymore. If iron is really going to sharpen iron, then there's going to be some sparks. There is no sparks waiting for the next 1900-page book from Ken Gentry that doesn't have to be dealt with at all. And if someone says, but if you give this up here and you give this up there, then you have to get, no, I don't. Oh, okay, 2 + 2 can be 5. And you haven't even done the math. You've just said, show me the equation. And I'll tell you if I agree with the answer. And they said, that's not good enough, Gary.
True. Yeah, that is.
Is that too dramatic?
Yeah, no. That's,
Okay.
No. Well, yeah, you've been. That's. I'm glad you said all that rather than me. So I'm okay.
I mean, Carol might say it. Maybe I'll get Carol. Well,
No.
but that's what I'm seeing. And because I think theology. What did you say Gary North said about gatekeepers?
There aren't any gatekeepers anymore.
And he said it when?
Oh, he said it over a number of years, but he's
But
still.
what time period?
Oh.
The 80s?
90s?
90s?
I probably in the 90s, and
Right.
then when the web became a reality, that was
Right. And if Gary North could see the web and say there are no more gatekeepers, and now we get to 2024, where the web is social media and constant communication, and people can communicate ideas literally at the speed of their thoughts,
Yeah.
then the gatekeepers have been buried. Forget them being gone, they've been buried. And people are having these conversations now.
Yeah.
And theology is something, turns out people can read their Bible. Turns out people can see things.
And let's be clear here. There's a lot of crazy stuff on eschatology. I mean, I deal with it every day. Well,
Right.
And I'll just post something, and someone they'll make this long list of what they think is going to happen at the end of history, and I put down here, this was all fulfilled in the first century. That's all I wrote.
Right.
So well, how could you say this? Are you saying that there's a statue actually spoke? And I wrote,
Wow.
are you telling me that if a statue spoke today, that would fool people? Really? You believe that?
Right.
I mean, and then she said that's never happened in history that a statue has spoken. And I'm not saying this is what I'm going to tell people is this
Vegas, I've seen statues
in the interpretation of this. But Heron of Alexandria built these devices that spoke, and it was all a money game. Put money in this thing and this. And so I'm sure this woman had never even heard of this before.
Right.
But that's not what's going on there with this idol that spoke. Right. What is this thing? What's going on here? You've got to go back to the first century and figure out what's going on. You can't take that and put it today. Now you have to maintain that there's actually going to be some sort of idol somewhere that's going to speak, and people are going to bow down to it. Come on, you got CGI. I mean, you got people. They just know it's fake. That was the CGI, and come on. But back then, I don't even think it had to do with what Heron of Alexandria was doing. I love Jim Jordan's exposition of Revelation 13. I think it's spot on what he's pulling together what was happening there. These two beasts, the sea beast, the land beast. You know, the lamb that had two horns, he spoke like a dragon. What is all that? You cannot interpret that in terms of what's happening today. You had to interpret that. How would somebody? What's a lamb? What horns? What are horns? Sea beast. Why sea? Why land? What's the collusion that's taking place? The number 666. I mean, Jim says, hey, where is the other place in the book of Revelation, in the Bible, where 666 appears other than the page 666? And if you were to ask somebody of that today, or even Bible commentators today, they couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you.
Which is funny before you answer that it's not even a cross-reference. We think of all the cross-references we have in Bibles. We have mind-blowing cross-references.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Mind-blowing cross-references. How no one in the history of cross-references.
Yeah. Makes this one.
Because it's where?
In First Kings chapter 10. And it's a description of Solomon's breaking the commandments of a king. All right? And the 666 is the only number in there. It's a number of talents of gold that he brings in. 666. Every other number in there about the number of horses and so forth and so on are round numbers. It's the only one that isn't a round number. And so what happens in the very next chapter, he marries all these foreign women, all these foreign wives, which...
Infidelity in the sense of...
Right.
It's intermarriage.
But bringing together these pagan nations with Israel, okay, violating the commandment. I think it's out of, is it Leviticus 17 or is it Deuteronomy? I can't remember which one it is. And then, so what happens in the period of the book of Revelation? Collusion between the Romans and the religious leaders, the Herodians and all that sort of thing to go up against the church.
Right.
Well, if you know that connection, Revelation 13 makes, even though you may not know all the details,
right,
then buying and selling.
Not all the Taylor Swift moments.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But buying and selling, people, that's economics. That's modern day economics. But you won't be able to buy and sell, and so it's got to be globalism and all that. And I always tell people, I said, look, if you think if you need a Bible verse to tell you of economic tyranny that's taking place, you don't understand how the Bible works. But what was going on back then? What was the buying and selling? Why is it that the Apostle Paul in the book in the book of Acts, what happened when he got into the temple? They threw him out. They threw him out of the temple. And so you have Jesus, I think it's in Matthew 21. Jesus goes into the temple for the second time. And what were they doing in the temple? They were buying and selling. In order to enter the temple, you had to go along with the religious leaders of that day in order to get in there. So if you take buying and selling in Revelation chapter 13 and try to turn it into modern day globalist economics, you miss the point of what's going on there. That temple was just being rebuilt, which was an affront to everything Jesus was. John chapter 2, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll build it, I'll raise it up again.
Keeping Gentiles out, right?
Yeah,
kind
right.
of hoarding God.
Yeah, all that stuff. And people say, oh, that's, no, it's the Antichrist and the Jews slaughtering the Jews and all that. That's what this is really all about. And global government, and you're going to be stamped on your, and all that kind of thinking. Okay, I mean, you can believe that. And again, I'm no Pollyanna here. I know we're in the mess. We're in the mess today.
Right.
I mean, come on. I see this. But it's always, even though something is fulfilled in terms of prophecy, does not mean there isn't any application to it.
Correct.
The reason that you could find all those, the thing that's going on in the book of Revelation, because that's the way human nature acts.
Right. There's always a beast. There's always intermarriage. Right. There's always unfaithfulness. There's always someone's in bed with this person and crony capitalism, whatever.
Right.
Like
collusion between the political powers and all that kind of thing. There's
you find the pretty girl, but she's pretty. She's not a Christian. You find yourself. There's that story, right? You know, she's pretty, and next thing you know, you're pulled to their gods, to their family.
Right. There's nothing new in any of that.
Right.
But because the book of Revelation has these time bookends, you have to read it and understand it in terms of those bookends, and those bookends say time is near. And John even says that he was a fellow partaker in the tribulation. So,
you responded to everybody. You wrote a letter. You responded back to everybody.
I responded to Doug. I think most of it. I think I sent him my long because they wanted my response. They wanted me to fly out and meet with them. And that's when I was going through this cancer deal and all that, and I really couldn't get on providentially, people knew what happened when I was in Mexico.
And for the record, I was talking with you. We were talking about maybe coordinating that. There would have been another reason for us to maybe get together and do stuff. I was getting busy. I was also annoyed at the situation, and me and you were talking as friends, and at some point we just were kind of like, you're going through I was like, right? right? I mean, if I would have said, Gary, get out here, we're going to make this happen, you probably would have been like, oh, okay. But I was like, you know what, Gary, let's just deal with this later, right? For the record, it wasn't like Gary just abandoned everybody.
Well, but let me be honest here. First thing they wanted me to come out and do this. I thought, I really couldn't do it because I had this cancer surgery and providentially didn't do it because of an incident that would happen to this thing, and I won't go into all that. And so I was smart. My wife, Carol, said, you should not go. You should not get on a plane and do this and so forth. So I listened to her that time. Yeah. Then it's like, well, let's do a Zoom or a Skype or something like that. And then I thought, I'm not going to do this. Yeah. I'm just not going to do it.
Right.
Because I didn't want. I know how the internet works. This probably would have been put up complete.
Yep.
I think it would have been, but how it would be used by others.
Right.
And even this, what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The people will take things out of here and all that.
Sure.
But okay. Yeah. I don't care at this point.
Right.
It doesn't bother me in the least. I mean, look, for those of you watching this for the first time, I mean, they contacted my pastor, my church, and I think maybe even my presbytery.
By they, who do you mean they?
Well, critics of mine.
Got
I don't know specifically who they were. Basically, well, you need to discipline Gary DeMar. Well, on what basis?
I think it was Luke Pearson. I'm just joking.
No, I don't.
Luke, I don't think.
No, Luke wouldn't do a thing like that. And the thing is, it's like, well, what would the discipline be? I'm not an elder in the church. I'm not ordained. I don't teach in the church. There are times I taught in the past, but I never dealt with this sort of thing.
Right.
I don't proselytize in my church.
Right.
If people ask me things, I'll talk to them, but I'm very respectful of the pastor. We're very good. We're very good friends. We go out, we eat together, husbands and wives. We go out together and we talk, and we don't really talk about this stuff. We just talk about stuff.
Right.
It's they've been very gracious to me on all this, and I don't make a big deal. I always tell people come up, I got kicked out of my church. I said, it's too bad, but I don't know what you can go to your pastor and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this and all that, but don't make it an issue, church-wide issue here. What you need to.
That's the irony to me in this whole thing, because I've known you, and your reputation of people knowing you is you're not a troublemaker. You actually don't do those things. Myself included, and people I've known, man, we came to this stuff and we were troublemakers, and I feel so bad for all the pastors that I bothered and annoyed and pushed because I had a view, whether it be Calvinism or preterism or theonomy or presuppositional apologetics. I mean, a complete ass to people for so many years. I mean, like, I'm the one that deserves to be, kicked out of church forever. You've never been that guy. You've never sowed division. I remember sitting with you at an event years ago, and I said, Gary, what are your thoughts? I never asked you your thoughts on infant baptism or covenantal. You said, I just don't get involved in that stuff. I'm not interested. And I was like, I mean, I couldn't even get you to talk about the objectivity of the covenant. You're like, that's not my thing.
No. I could sit down with somebody and want to, here's my thoughts on these sorts of things, but I'm not getting.
But you don't. I mean, no. And so it's interesting that the guy that's never picked a fight, all of a sudden had a handful of people pick a fight with you. And so my question is, you responded to how many of them with this response letter?
I think the only one I really sent it to I think I only sent it to Doug because it was an issue for them and they had to make a decision.
Right.
So they're the only ones I sent it to.
Okay.
And I've sent it out to, I have a short version and I have a long version. My long version shows all the inconsistencies and so forth, all these guys.
Has anybody requested it that was have any of the signers requested to read what you have, your response?
I don't recall that they did. So now, Jeff Ventrella, I've known Jeff for years.
Yeah.
And I in fact spoke at the Blackstone Blackstone deal a number of times.
Yeah.
David Bahnsen
Well,
spoke there.
and you've had him speak at your events. Or no?
We published one of his books.
Okay.
So we've been good friends. He knew Greg Bahnsen and all that. So, and he was kind enough to send me, thing, and I wrote a response.
Yeah.
I never heard anything back as to. He said thank you for sending it. I wanted to what do you think?
Right.
I sent because I would not go out there and record or do a Skype or a Zoom or whatever. I sent those guys my response.
Right.
And I can't recall if I sent it to Cross Politic guys or not. I'm not sure. But if they requested it, I would send it.
Right. And you've got it. You've got it there. People can
I've got
read your
it.
position.
People will come, Gary. And I said, well, here's the full 210-page version of this.
Right.
And I add to it all the time about clean it up and add some things as I come across some things. I said, here it is. And it's interesting. Everyone I've ever sent it to has never come back and said, I still think you're wrong about all this. They don't, because I don't think they've ever been confronted with some of the things I've been raising. And by the way, these aren't things I've been raising.
Right.
These were things that people came to me and asked questions about.
Right. Because you're the one out there, boots on the ground, people bringing this.
Yeah,
to
and I think, I used to do radio interviews. I used to do a lot of radio interviews. I would speak around. I debated, and I don't know if Ken. I think Ken's had a few debates maybe on postmillennialism, and so I've been out there.
Yeah.
People know who I published. Last Day's Madness has been one of our biggest sellers.
Yeah.
And so forth. So, and if people emailed me, I'd respond.
Right.
And if I could, and if I didn't have an answer for it, I would say, here's something you could read or whatever. Or I wrote this article on it. Here, take this. Have any questions? So I've been open to all of this,
right.
And as a result, I think there were lots of people out there who just felt it was their duty to confront me with this, and for me to, stop with the questioning and answering,
right.
To kind of put an end to it all, which would have gotten them off the hook. I'll give you an example. Andrew Sandlin's the one that kind of started this, and I was good friends with Andrew. We spoke on conferences together and so forth, and he's the one that came up with the letter. But he had written letters back at the end of the '90s when Walt Hibbard was alive. I don't know if you know Walt.
Yeah.
Okay, Walt. Walt Hibbard was he was a Christian bookseller. You wanted books on Reformed theology. Walt Hibbard's organization, I think it was called Puritan and Reformed, and that's where you got your books. And then he kind of got into the preterist thing, and then he goes to Baker Bookhouse and he says, "Hey, you need to republish this book by Russell on the parousia."
The famous.
Right, and
So he's the reason why it got republished?
He's the one that got it. Yes,
James Stewart Russell's parousia.
Right.
He's the reason why it came back in print.
Right, and got Baker to do it.
Wow.
And Sproul recommended the book. Ken Gentry recommended it.
Right.
I recommended it. Let me say that again. Ken Gentry recommended it. Sproul recommended it, and I recommended it. And it was, and so.
Doesn't everyone still recommend it?
I don't think Ken has.
That's a go-to staple.
He has not disavowed his recommendation. He would say he had reservations about some things, probably. Oh, okay.
Right.
I don't agree with everything Russell said either. But he would not be in the category of a full or hyper preterist.
Got it. Once again, as long as you just say,
as long as you have a couple of these things. So anyway, that got this thing moving, and then and Andrew Sandlin wrote a criticism of Walt Hibbard because he was pushing a lot of full preterist stuff through his book deal, and they put him out of business.
Okay.
They put Walt Hibbard out of business because he was selling preterist stuff.
Full preterist material.
Yes.
Jesus is not going to return.
Right.
Okay.
And they,
So.
we can't let this guy be a clearinghouse for these books.
Okay. Well, it seems reasonable when we talk about heresy. I mean, I thought everyone agreed
Yeah,
that
right.
that was heresy. Okay.
Yeah.
So that just tells me that Sandlin has a history in some way,
Right.
shape, or form of making sure he finds the heretics.
Right.
And making sure they get what's coming to them.
Right. And he even confronted Sproul in his book, The Last Days According to Jesus. He wasn't hard enough on the full preterist stuff.
Who confronted him?
Sandlin, Andrew Sandlin, wrote a letter to Ligonier over that, wrote a letter to Hibbard,
Saying
wrote
that,
a letter to me back in the 1990s.
saying that R.C. Sproul wasn't enough of a preterist?
Wasn't
Or
enough of a critic of the full preterist position.
Got it.
Okay.
So writes the book, but isn't clear enough on
Right.
who to make sure we designate as
Right.
heretics.
And this is another interesting thing. Andrew Sandlin wrote me a letter. So this is back in the 90s, but that didn't stop Andrew from speaking at some of the same events that I was speaking at
Right.
much later.
Right.
So, and so it's not like what the things I was asking were new.
Right.
They've always been there, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, we got to do something about Gary DeMar with all this, and so that's when the letter started. And it all came because of that Burroughs of Berea interview.
Right.
Yeah.
But it seemed like people were watching and people were looking to get you on something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my question is that if you say, look, I'm open to sit down with anybody and have the conversation on this stuff, I know you are. It's got to be the right environment, I'm assuming. But let's say someone says that. It would seem like someone could just jump to the punchline and say, okay, is what you're telling me, Gary, no matter what verse I bring in front of you for the end of time, final judgment and resurrection and all that stuff, you're going to just point to someone that's held that view is not the end of time history, or even if I stick on 1 Corinthians 15 or Revelation 20, you're going to just tell me because of timestamps and markers and indicators and even the way we look at 1 Corinthians, you're basically going to say, no matter what I bring to you, you're going to say I have a hard time seeing based on this. So you're just playing this full preterist game by deduction. And you're making all of us just say, well, we must be full preterists. And you're kind of playing this rhetorical, exegetical, hermeneutical game.
And that's I can understand that. And here's my take on this. There's a whole list of verses that I believe are actually, I don't think there's any other way to say that they don't refer to AD 70. I just, so there are those. And there are some passages of Scripture I can understand how people would say they don't apply to AD 70. And the thing is, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people saying these verses we believe absolutely refer to the second coming of Christ, the physical appearing of Christ. And all I've been saying is there are people who don't hold that view, and I don't see that as being a doctrinal biblical problem.
You don't think it's bringing people into some sort of liberalism. You don't think it's bringing people into some sort of degenerate lifestyle. You don't think it's bringing people into hating their wives and their kids and not being involved in government. You're saying, look, I think there's enough guardrails within the Christian faith, Life and Character, which I think is a book we sell here, that you can be a good, solid Christian, and there's just weird stuff on the outside, and you're saying, like, I don't think everyone's got to get a gun to their head to answer those questions.
Look, there are people who I would could say take things too far. You have Calvinists and you have hyper Calvinists. So there's that.
Right.
There are dispensationalists, for example, who don't want to have anything to do with getting involved in politics per se, but yet there was Tim LaHaye who did.
Right.
And I would say that there are kooks and crazies in every movement. And since you mentioned to me not picking fights with people and so forth, I learned I learned from my experiences in seminary over the theonomy argument and Christian Reconstruction about how not to do things. And the theonomists got a bad name because of their approach to it. Calvinists, a lot of the Reformed guys who were Calvinists, who come to seminary and on Sundays would speak in some of the small churches in the Mississippi area, and they would take the stuff that they learned about Calvinism or whatever the case might be, and start preaching on that stuff on Sunday morning. And most of these congregations were small. Most of them were elderly, older people, and so forth and so on. Got back to the seminary, and I remember Jack Scott, who got up in the pulpit. There's very few chapel messages that I remember, but I remember Jack Scott's message above all else. And he was a professor of Old Testament, and wrote this the Sunday school lesson for the Presbyterian Journal. Fine man, great scholar, great guy. And he started going through the book of Job and took Job's miserable comforters, and I can still hear it, still reverberating with me. And he said, right, and he says, wrong. These guys seemingly had their doctrinal ducks in a row, but they were dead wrong in the way that they applied all of this, what they were taking to Job. And then he basically, reamed out these guys going out and taking the message of the gospel and free grace and so forth, and just tearing into people on the basis of all of that. I watched some real strong theonomists and so forth in the way that they I won't say they attacked professors, but they try to get to professors on the theonomy stuff and Christian Reconstruction stuff, and it's just the wrong approach to take. So I learned a lot from that. And so I've just been sympathetic to people who have questions, and this is what I'm doing, and I think there are a lot of people out there who are attacking these people who are wrong in their approach of attacking these people. You're not winning them, especially when you will not sit down with them. The assumption is, oh, they're heretics. I can't debate a heretic.
Right.
But you can debate Muslims all the time if you want, or debate atheists.
Right, yeah.
But you can't debate somebody who disagrees with you on some things that, there's some iffy issues with it.
Right.
So, anyway, I learned a lot from bad examples.
And do you feel that the response you've given, that anyone can read,
yes,
right? You didn't go and firestorm, let's go debate and go to national
and I didn't
circuit.
Publish it. I didn't publish it either.
Yeah, you didn't publish it. It's available for anyone to read.
Right.
And you welcome comments and thoughts and corrections with what you've written. Are you happy with that sort of being the final response to what I'm calling the 2023, Gary controversy?
Yeah, I would say, okay, fine. Those guys. I don't say they don't want to have anything to do with me anymore. I haven't written them off as friends.
Right.
I did not. I made it very clear to Andrew Sandlin. I did not appreciate his approach to this with me.
Right.
Because I would not answer this something was sent to me privately. He decided, well, we're just going to put it up on Facebook.
Right. Yeah.
And then there were a couple of other people involved. I won't name them. And then what that came up with. Let's see, Whitefield Theological Seminary and Sam Frost, and Whitefield Theological Seminary didn't seem to have a problem with Sam Frost being there, and who was, not only was he just talking about full preterism, but he had published stuff on full preterism, and nothing was said about that.
Right.
And then Ken, I'm drawing a blank, Ken Talbot was seemingly okay with that. And Ken Talbot was one of the board members of American Vision And Ken, and supposedly Andrew Sandlin told me, oh, Ken has been a vociferous critic of full preterism. I'm thinking, well, he didn't see that with Sam Frost,
Right.
because Ken Talbot actually called me on the phone, said, what do you think about having Sam Frost coming to Whitefield? I said, I don't have a problem with that. That's,
Yeah.
And then Ken Talbot never said a thing to me during the time all the board meetings we had about
Right.
things that Andrew Sandlin wrote about me in late 90s. So all of a sudden, 2023, I'm the bad guy here,
Right.
and it's time to go after Gary DeMar.
Right.
And at first, I thought, what am I going to do about this? And I just said, I'm going to stand my ground on this. And my convictions were I was not going to capitulate just because it would have been advantageous for me to capitulate
Right.
to it. Say, I'll do this, even though I'm uncomfortable in doing. I could not do it. And the consequences, I took whatever consequences there were that were going to come from it.
And you still sleep well at night?
Not always, but not because of this.
Okay. So this didn't keep you up?
This didn't keep me up at all. Now, my wife was a bit perturbed
Right.
by it
Right.
all. Perturbed, not perturbed.
Yeah.
Perturbed by it all.
She was pre-tribbed.
Yeah,
She was pre-tribbed.
because it's your wife is a protector.
Yeah.
If someone had come after my wife, I mean,
Right,
I
yeah.
would have been
Yeah.
a real bulldog.
I've seen
over
the pickaxe and the
it. You saw the
hole you
pickaxe,
dug,
man. You
so,
saw it.
I mean,
You saw what I can do.
So you're good with this whole thing.
I'm
You're
good with it. I am
Where it's
good with
landed,
it.
you feel good.
Right, and these people, a lot of people who've criticized me, that's fine. I have no problem with it. There's a couple of jerks out there who I don't appreciate, and I think they're immature. And one of them is a pastor, and I think if you're a pastor of a church, and the way you've responded to me periodically, sorry, I have no respect for you whatsoever. And I also on Facebook, I'll post something, but Gary, you need to respond to the 3 questions. I said, grow up. Can we just grow up? Come on here. You can't handle it.
So final word is grow up.
Yeah. And it's, this is too serious for you to say stuff like that. I think it is very serious. I think there are people out there who have questions that you're dismissing them on the basis of the questions because you're saying, well, history has taught this. All the theologians agree. This is what the creeds say. This is what the confessions say, and that argument isn't working anymore, because if there's one area where eschatology has not been really dealt with, it's eschatology. It hasn't been. You can hold 4 views of this, 5 views of that, 10 views of this on eschatology and still be okay. So as long as they believe those sorts of things. But some of those other things in between are pretty critical, especially to say if a dispensationalist believes they're two redemptive peoples of God. But you're not calling John MacArthur or all these dispensationalists heretics because they believe that. They may do it under their breath, but they're not calling them out. Although a lot of the Reformed guys in the 40s and so forth called dispensationalism a Reformed heresy.
Right.
So there's that.
So would you say final word is you still believe there's a lot of work to do in this category? There's a lot of work to do in eschatology, and you're hopeful that people will actually begin to do that we are actually entering into a dispensation of people,
Lowercase d.
lowercase d, a time period where we're probably going to see a lot of work done in this area.
It is, and it's happening by guys
who aren't seminary trained.
They're not seminary trained.
Right.
I mean, Jonathan Sedlak, who written this tremendous book. It's a historical study of what people going all the way back to Origen, to pretty recent, on how they understand the supposed transition text in Matthew 24 verses 34 and 35. It's a brilliant study. And the guy's a master electrician, but sharp as a tack. And then a fellow emailed me. He had written.
So it's almost like God's going to raise up like fishermen and tax collectors.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like do things.
yeah, exactly. That's good. And some guy sent me his book on the Olivet Discourse. It's pretty good. And when he saw Jonathan Sedlak's book, he said, I think I'm going to do the same thing on 2 Thessalonians 2. He's going to look at the kind of the history of what the interpretations were. And so I sent him something that I had someone translate from Latin on 2 Thessalonians 2 that was done back in the 17th century. And he just said, wow. And so, American Vision has been republishing stuff from a guy named Nehemiah Nisbet going back to the late 18th century.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable stuff that most people have never even heard of before. And then this guy is quoting guys 100 years before him on these things that only recently, because there are no longer any gatekeepers and because of what happened with the internet, these works are available.
There's an eschatological history that we don't have organized.
We don't. It's absolutely true.
And would you say, as you enter into this next phase of your life, being a part of that eschatological history and categorizing it and championing it as something that you're looking forward to doing?
Yeah, as many years as God gives me to do this, yes. But I am thrilled by the younger generation coming up. I mean, these two sisters up in Ohio interviewing me, a 2.5-hour interview, not just on eschatology, but on the applicational side of all of this in my work. And I'm thinking, we've got Zach Davis and Travis Dunn and Mike Sullivan and Robert Cruikshank, all these guys who are doing the spade work and all this. And they can't be dismissed because they're going back and they're doing a lot of digging, finding stuff that, has been out there.
Right.
And they're pulling it all together. And you can criticize them for them and just say, well, the creeds have spoken. You got to deal with the work. I'll finish with this. I love going on YouTube and finding people who can do things. Guys that make stuff and just do all kinds of stuff, and just gifted beyond machines and technology and all that. And I was watching this show called Giuseppe's Garage.
Okay.
It's an Italian family, third generation, and Giuseppe is 12 years old. Okay, 12 years old. And I saw videos of him, he's being 10 years old. The kid can break down, tear apart, and rebuild an engine, body work on a car, welding, today they use Bondo and so forth and all that. They used to use lead, you put a torch to lead and all this.
Yeah.
Sort. This is a 12-year-old. It's got a YouTube channel on this sort of thing. And so it's all these little videos. Anyway, his dad, there's one that shows up here, and the dad says he hears this banging. It's 9:30 at night. He's all this banging, and he's home. This kid's homeschooled, and he said, "Giuseppe, what are you doing?" And he was working on something and all this sort of thing. And this is what the kid said. He says, "If you're going to change the world, you have to put in the hours." I don't know where Giuseppe's coming from eschatologically, but I love that just a little short video. If you're gonna change the world, you got to put in the hours. And I think that's what this is all about. And I got involved in all this because I wanted to know how the Bible applied to all areas of life to make these fundamental changes. And you got to put in the hours, you got to put in the work.
And show your work.
And you got to show it. So people can look at it and say, I want to see what you've done. So anyway.
Good enough for me.